We're heading back to Europe now. Now remember, when we left Europe before, the Roman Empire had fallen. This period in Europe we call like medieval times or the Middle Ages. And the reason we call it the Middle Ages is it's between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, which is something you'll learn about in ninth grade. So the whole reason this is called the Middle Ages is the Renaissance is seen as this great time, the Roman Empire is seen as this great time, and this period is in the middle. Now, hopefully you remember, it really was only the Western Roman Empire that fell. The Western Roman Empire falls, splits into a bunch of pieces. The Eastern Roman Empire is going to persist for a long time. That's a place that we'll discuss in a subsequent lecture. Right now, I want to talk about the Western Roman Empire. It gets split up amongst a bunch of different states. You can see them there. The one we're going to talk about today mostly are the Franks, the Frankish kingdom, because that's the one that lasts the longest. The others fizzle out quickly. Remember, when Rome was at the very end, it was officially a Christian empire, and Christianity was very popular throughout the empire. Well, it wasn't universal. Not everyone was an adherent. Some people worshipped older religions that were more attuned to sort of many god spirits, all that kind of stuff. So some people were in these older religions. Many people were Christians. Well, Clovis, who's the guy that really starts off the Frankish kingdom, he for a while is a member of these older religions, but he converts, so he sort of helps to bring Christianity from being the religion of the old government to being also the religion of sort of his new government that's up in modern day France. So Clovis is this very important king, rules well, conquers some land, again creates a strong state, roughly equivalent to modern day France, but not completely analogous to modern day France. But then of course he dies, and the custom amongst these bearded Germanic lords and stuff was to divide their land between their sons when they died. You can see that that's a common theme throughout history. Genghis Khan did the same thing. I'd argue probably the reason that rulers tend to do that is so that their sons don't fight, right? So that their sons know, oh, they'll all be taken care of, you'll all get a piece. Now let's pause the politics for a minute and look at the society. The society of medieval Europe is different from ancient Rome. It is this sort of interesting blend of German and Roman cultures. When I say Roman cultures, I'm talking about, again, the old empire that was dominated by the Italians. I'm talking about the old empire that by the end was dominated by the church, by the Christian church, I mean. And this new German way of doing things that, again, comes from those, we call them barbarians, even though that's not a very nice way to word to use on them, that came out of the, the forests, the guys, again, with the sort of the big beards. Medieval society is a blend of these two things, a blend of German and Roman societies. Let's take a look at that society now and some of the ways that the medieval Europeans used to enforce justice. One was the weregild. That was the practice of someone who injured someone or killed someone had to pay money either to that person or to their family. The reason for that was, again, they don't have jails back then, and they also want to stop a cycle of violence. There was a long history in Germany, in the forests there, of family feuds, that would go on for generations because it would just be this endless cycle of violence. The idea of that payment was to stop the cycle of violence, that, instead of, I kill your brother and then you come after me and then my brother comes after you, we would just end the cycle. If I do something bad, I owe you money, and that just sort of stops it right there. And whether or not that's a just and fair or wise thing to do, you think about that. And then the other very famous thing is the ordeal. To understand the ordeal, this was something they would do instead of a trial. You've got to understand that, again, these people are sort of very, very deeply religious. Religious in a way that is sometimes difficult to understand now. The accused, like this person right here with the green hat, would have to do some sort of physical trial that would be determined by the judge, the guy sitting in the chair. He would pick a physical trial that the guy would have to do. And if the guy completed it, that meant that, God helped him complete it because God knew he was innocent. And if he fails, that means that God didn't help him, so he must be guilty. So they would do stuff like this, right? This guy in the picture is holding a bar of iron, and the bar of iron is very hot. It was like heated up in a fire, so it's incredibly hot. And the judge would say, okay, you have to hold that. And you have to hold it until I say you're done. And if you drop it before I say you're done, God's not helping you, and you must be guilty. But if you're able to hold it until I say you're done, oh, then you must be innocent. So that would be how they would determine guilt or innocence in many different trials. The reason that this isn't totally crazy, I would say, is the judges also, sort of like our diviners back in Africa, in ancient Africa, would be often wise, often well informed. They'd often have an idea about whether or not the person was guilty. And if they thought that the person was guilty, they'd make them hold it for like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or they would make them hold. They would make sure that the iron was very, very, very hot. They'd like heat it up, extra hot, so that it would be harder for them. If they thought they were innocent, maybe they wouldn't heat it up so much. Maybe they would make it a little bit cooler. There were ways for the judges to sort of tilt these things one way or another, depending on how they wanted it to go. When the Roman Empire falls, the church does not fall. The church persists. It's in many ways the inheritor of the legacy of the Roman Empire. At first, all the different parts of the Roman Empire are divided up into different territories, and the bishop of every territory had control over the church in the different areas. Eventually, over time, the bishop in Rome, the bishop who was in charge of literally the city of Rome, became the head of the entire church. The Bishop of Rome became the most important bishop, the boss of all the bishops, and they eventually started calling that person the Pope. And the Pope today is the head of the Roman Catholic Church. In addition to that, there was this big movement in medieval times for men to become monks and women to become nuns. And basically all that meant is that someone would, dedicate themselves to their religion and withdraw from the world, move, in a monk's case, move to a monastery. In a nun's case, they had a different place for them. They would move there and they would be, again, totally withdrawn from the world and just practice their religion, but they would do a couple other things too. One of the other important aspects of the monastic movement is monasteries became very important places in the different towns and areas they were in. Monks became dedicated not only to their religion, but also to learning in general. Monasteries became not only places where monks would go to, learn about religion, but they also became schools. They became places that, many people could go to learn about different things. They became hospitals because the monks were, again, probably the most educated people in the area, and the monks would, and they had a religious calling, and they would take care of people. So they became sort of like the local hospital and like the local school. And they were a place that travelers could rest. They would take people in because they were supposed to be charitable. And they were a place that travelers could rest. They were sort of like, inns. They were all these things all wrapped up into one, in addition to being sort of a church. So they were very, very, very important in the medieval world. Now, in addition to that, you have a very powerful pope comes along, Pope Gregory I, and he takes physical control of Rome, of the surrounding territories. So he creates actually a little nation that he is in charge of. And then in addition to that, he's in charge of all of these monasteries and all of these bishops who are the heads of the religion for very religious people all throughout Europe, which, as we're going to see in future lectures, makes them very powerful. Now back to politics real quick. Charles the Hammer Martel is a political ruler of the Frankish kingdoms and he stops the Muslim invasion in 732 in France. So the Muslim empires had conquered Spain, and they ruled Spain for a really long time. They'd conquered Spain and they wanted to keep going, but they are stopped in the south of France. So that pretty much, puts the northern cap on the Muslim empires that we studied back in chapter 6. They rule Spain until the 1400s, but no more. And France and all them end up having this separate history, partially because of Charles the Hammer Martel. Then the Hammer's son, Pepin the Short, reunites the Frankish kingdom. Remember, it had been divided up long ago. He sets the stage for his son, Charles the Great, to form the Carolingian Empire, this big empire. So Pepin the Short, just know he's the son of Charles Martel. He reunifies the empire, sets the stage for his son to be called the Great. Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, which just means Charles the Great, was this incredibly famous ruler. I'm being really bad, only covering him just for a second. He rules over the Frankish kingdoms, leads them to sort of great prosperity. He is very, very dedicated to promoting Christianity. Remember, Europe was not totally converted at this point. There are many people following these older religions. He wants everyone to follow Christianity. He's very dedicated to that. He's also very dedicated to education. He feels like the way that Europe is going to bring itself out of these, dark ages, which is what we call this time at some points, is through education. He wanted the monks and people in his court to write and copy books. It's actually during his time, you see that picture way over there, those are monks and they're writing down books. They don't have a printing press in Europe at this point, so what monks literally did was they copied books by hand to make extra copies of them. Charlemagne encouraged that. He wanted there to be more books, so he made sure that the monks were copying many books and producing and preserving ancient knowledge. Much of the ancient knowledge we have today of like ancient Rome and many copies of the Bible and stuff like that exist because of Charlemagne's efforts. So he helps to sort of preserve learning, and he's very dedicated to learning. So Charles the Great really, really wants to pull Europe out of the Dark Ages, and he tries so hard, but he's only a man. He doesn't live forever. He dies. His son is able to keep the empire together for a while, but his grandsons aren't. So the kingdom is eventually divided up amongst his grandsons. Lothar, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald end up dividing up the empire, and Europe remains in a period of great disunity, pretty much until today. They never ever get reunified. He dreamed of recreating the Roman Empire, and it never happens.